Hello, hello, hello. Hopefully, I'm coming through loud and clear. Uh, Good morning. Welcome to the stream. Looks like I'm still waiting for folks to pile in here. Show Echo showed up nice and early. Looks like he's AFK. I was talking to Squirrel Hermit earlier, and he's out and about, so he might show up in the comments today. Not doing guests yet, but I'm going to give it a moment and see who all shows up. I know it's early on a Sunday. Some folks are going to be in church. Other folks may not even be awake yet. My West Coast friends are likely still getting up over in the East Coast and across the pond. Folks are probably getting on with their day. I know Sundays is also a game day for a lot of folks, and I believe there may even be some other streams going on. But I'm testing out new time slots and seeing what works. Hey, Grumpy, good morning, Grumpy Old Slan. I don't know if you heard or not, Grumpy, but Squirrel Hermit is currently uh, out of his home because of that big train crash in Ohio. Uh, so thinking about him and his family. They're safe. Mage's Musings. Good morning to you, oh felt wizard one. Um, yeah. So it looks like we got folks showing up here. We may even get an old geek today. I know he's got some stuff he's got to do. Um, but this early, we might actually be able to get folks from UK and Europe and all of that. I will be drinking coffee this morning because it is early for my schedule. I may have mentioned it. Grumpy, he's fine. They got evacuated. Him and the cats and the wife are out. Plus, he as he mentioned, a few choice books from his collection. It's just a matter of safety due to toxic fumes and all of that. So, and Squirrel Hermit, if that was something I was not supposed to say to folks and share with everybody, I apologize, but that's pretty dire. And I hope everything works out. I am usually awake on Sunday before noon because I have a 22-pound dictator that likes to wake us up no matter what. Echo, there you are, sir. All right. No, I'm usually up this early anyways, so doing a stream this time in the morning is cool, and I'm generally wasting this time just drinking coffee and scrolling through Facebook and getting my day going. I work on a West Coast schedule, even though I live in the Midwest, and so my day is skewed. So it's not unusual for me. All right, looks like we do have folks piling in. As I put up in the crazy looking thumbnail for this video, this is going to be an AMA. It's going to be an Ask Me Anything. You post questions and I will answer them. Well, it is early, so I may be skimming through the comments. I am happy that you're up this early because it's nice to see you. It's cool to know that I was worth getting up for. But you want a wizard beard? Any advice? First of all, have a dad who's from northeastern Germany. And also be lazy and don't like to shave. That also helps. I will say this though, this does not get any longer. This will stop growing at this. Well, it keeps growing obviously, but it never gets any longer. I've tried conditioning it. I've tried treating it. It does not like to. And also it naturally wants to split into two forks. My kids always wanted to braid it and beat it. And I I've let them do it once. I did try dyeing it once when I was younger. I tried dyeing my beard, and at the time it was just a short little goatee mustache thing. Don't do that. The skin of your face does not like hair dye, and you will regret it. I had to scrub my face raw with a toothbrush to get the dye out of my pores, because the pores of your face are so much bigger than the pores on your head and all that, and they just like suck at that stuff right up. And yeah, there's a photo of me shortly after I took that, and while I look like I'm scary and badass in the picture, I'm just pissed off and annoyed. Um, uh, up at the crack of 11. Well, wizards have to get up early if they're going to pour through those thick books and make us those top quality videos that we all love to do to just to eat up quicker than who can make them. So alrighty. To fill the space between questions, I can certainly talk on subjects as well. I was on Shadow and Sun's stream last night. Thank you, Shadow, for having me. And we were talking about tips for new GMs with a focus on sci-fi gaming, which Mage's Musings was there as well. Good morning, Hungar. What up? Well, according to the topic in the comments, really all of us were all up and apparently too early. So, yeah, so we were talking about tips on getting on new GMs. It's always an interesting subject. I have to dig deep sometimes for that because I haven't been a new GM for so long. I started when I was 8, and I am now 51. And I've been playing role-playing games, miniatures games for all that time, but not just D&D. There was a time when I could, with absolute certainty, say I had played at least once about 90% of what had been published. But that's because back in the day, not as much got published. And I mean, there's a caveat there. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that got published that I never saw, but we didn't have the internet, and we relied on the buying whims of local game stores. And I don't know if there's plenty of us here who Mechhead Studios, Jason, my friend, welcome. He has a great channel on YouTube. It's not a very active channel, but if you like a channel on crafting, painting, and just general stuff, that's a great channel. He's a prop maker, and yeah, he's a model builder, gunpla, and all that stuff. But like I was saying, with game stores, if you were old enough to remember the proliferation of friendly local game stores before they became such a specialty thing, and they were their own worst enemies. Most game stores that I remember are run by folks who love gaming, but aren't particularly good at business. And so, yeah, they would often buy the stupidest things or not buy the thing that you want. Good morning, Omen. Welcome. And yeah, so back in the day, I could say that I had played probably 90% of what I'd come across. And that's just because that's the environment I grew up in. We were avid gamers and would pick anything up. I had a buddy of mine. I've mentioned him in another stream, I believe. His name was Garth. Met him in junior high. He and I were also artists, and we would game anything. If there was a show on TV, especially like cartoons, after school cartoons, Saturday cartoons, we would make games out of all of them. He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe, anything that let us draw characters and then play with them was awesome. I mean, we even did an RPG for the Disney's Gummy Bear cartoon, and I got to say that was fun. I mean, that is a fantasy genre, but yeah, it was just silly fun. Nowadays, I can't make that claim. There is just too much out there. Anybody can write anything, and you can publish freely, either self-publishing on your own website or your blog, or Drive Through RPG is great. War Games Vault, any of those one bookshelf groups. What I'm actually in the wargaming sphere, what's really neat to see is that on Drive Through, we're now seeing self-published rule sets that are then accompanied by uh, 3D printable STLs for miniatures, and that is really cool. The title escapes me. I think it's let me see if I can find it. But I just picked up a Lunar Combat, fictitious 1970s, early 60s lunar warfare miniature game set for 6mm, and the creator of the rules um, created a set of miniatures to go with it as well. And I can't remember the name of it. I'm so bad with names. But yeah, the neat thing was, here are your rules that you can print and play. But also now we have print and play 3D miniatures. Print and play used to be the realm of cardboard counters and things like that. But now we have miniatures. Uh, I would love to try to learn 3D sculpting, but there is a long path that I would have to go down, which currently I'm not really in a place financially to do so, because I would need a much more powerful computer, and then I would need a lot of time to learn it. Now I have time now that I'm an empty nester, but I still have a full-time job and other hobbies. Um, but really feel like 3D sculpting addresses some of the issues I have had with physical sculpting. Um, Being very ADHD, it is hard for me to sit down and sculpt a range of like miniatures, because I don't want to have to resculpt the same thing over and over again. And in the past, I've managed to pull off some cheats, but those cheats are often inefficient and costly, because you would have to sculpt master parts, then have them cast, wait for them to get back to you, and then use those, and that works. But 3D sculpting would be great, because then I could um, develop a library of pouches and helmets and armor plates and textures and all of that, that you can then freely interchange and splice together. And a lot of times, if depending on how you're doing it, you can sculpt one miniature once, throw it into some software, rig it for posing, pose it, and then go back and touch it up. It's yeah, that's the way to do things. I mean, yes, there's that print barrier, but even that's barely a barrier anymore nowadays. There's always companies willing to become licensed 3D printers for you. Um, you can make that jump from 3D printing to physical sculpting. But yeah, so Omen, listening to me chipmunk away at 2 times speed. All right. So who's got questions? We already had a beard question. Um, Given dead air, I will talk forever and unendingly. This is why I also don't stay active in team meetings when I'm at work, because within 30 minutes, everybody knows everything there is to know about me. Yes and no. So maker spaces are great if you can find them. Um, the nice thing about it, honestly, is that beyond maker spaces, 3D printers are getting so cheap that it is near impossible in the gaming sphere, at least the miniature gaming sphere, to not know somebody who's got one, or a friend of a friend. I have a friend back in Washington who has like 6 machines. He's got 3 resin and 3 filament printers, and given time, it it is possible for me to find an STL, make it available to him, and have him print it and send it to me. For Christmas, he sent me a box of Imperial Army troops for Star Wars Legion. They will join my stormtroopers, which I can never have enough stormtroopers. But um, yeah, it's hard not to have a friend. I mean, my brother's got two printers. He's got one that he keeps saying he's going to give to me that needs a little bit of work, but I've been here 6 months and it hasn't appeared. No shade to him; he's busy. Um, Seems like everybody else I know is in a different stage of their life. At least locally, they've all got kids still, and I have kids, but my kids are out on their own. This is natural facial hair. It is not yak's hair, spirit gum to my face. No. I It's funny. I have a friend, or had a friend, who was follically challenged on his head. He used to get mad because I would cut my hair into a mohawk, because I was taking it for granted, my hair. And I'm like, well, nobody goes bald in my family. Nobody goes bald in my family. This is like, I got, I at one point had like 90-year-old relatives who had beautiful full heads of hair and facial hair. Um, I'm surprised my hair hasn't done more what my beard does and go white. My dad, by the time he was 50, big old cotton head, but he's a ginger, so uh, blame the children. Yeah, yeah. I actually yesterday had a real big bout of missing my kids. Um, Having moved, across the country from them right as my youngest is getting out into the world is a tough thing. But thanks to the wonderful world of the internet, I can I can talk to my kids and see them, without having to actually travel, which is good because I'm not made out of money and it's not getting any cheaper. All right, so enough of that. Stress is late 60s despite having full head of hair. I hear this, and there's a generation that likes to blame it on stress, but I really think it was just because of how crappy they were eating and living. I mean, that's not universal, but there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of healthy living aspects that they had in the past that really weren't. Um, and so, it, I can never learn camera positioning. I'm going to be looking like I'm not looking at you guys because I'm trying to keep up with the comments. But yeah, it's all right. So Mechhead Studio, Star Trek RPG. Which version do I prefer? I have only played two, and only one is officially a Star Trek game. And that is the FOSSA one. Uh, I like FOSSA's approach. I know it's outdated, but I really do like the levels of building your character, where you go from your Starfleet experience to your early career, and then you can build tours, very travelery, and then you have different specialties. If you are ever wanting to play a Star Trek styled RPG and don't want to drop a ton of money, there is a great, it's not a spoof. It's definitely a labor of love and an honest attempt at doing a lighter rules set of rules for Star Trek. It's called Far Trek. Um, he's no longer making print copies available, uh, but I believe if you were to Google Far Trek, you'll find it. It's a downloadable PDF, and it is neat in that it's ostensibly kind of set towards the original series. Um, and it has a few nice genre conventions built into the rules for the game. For example, if you play a red shirt, which is sort of a class in the game, you have a ability that allows if your character is ever killed, you can immediately come back in the next scene with a character who is identical in stats, but has like a different name because there's always more red shirts. So that's a fun one. But it was really it had a really popular and active Google Plus community. It tells you how long it's been, but it was fun. Um, let's take a look here. All right, so let's see what Echo has to say. Uh, you know, I would check out Far Trek. It is not get a big glossy shiny thing like Modiphius's. It's a little even the print versions were kind of digest format, but it's solid. Um, and I've never been able to find it. I hope the Google Plus community landed somewhere. I don't know. Is there a natural place where Google Plus communities migrated? Because we had play aids and new ships and adventures. Uh, I had a project I was working on for the longest time where I have this book of Star Trek quotes. Um, and much like old episodes used to use like literary quotes or Shakespeare quotes, things like that, as titles, I was going through and actually making adventures based on quotes from the Star Trek series as their title. Um, so that yeah, somewhere that's all out there. I was also translating stuff from the various Star Trek fan films that have been done into Far Trek, and because it's such a rules light system, it was really easy to do. Um, Google it, Echo Far Trek. I mean, if you want to dip a toe into an honest representation of Star Trek that is not going to cost you $50+ and we're not even going to get into what trying to find FOSSA would cost you. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have 2 box sets of the FOSSA game, neither of which are the ones I owned when I was a kid. Um, yeah, look it up. It's a good one. Oh man, life path systems are pretty cool. Wish we got more games that did it. Yes. Um, I did find out from my brother um, that Janelle Jacquet is uh, redoing her original central casting book, which originally was a fantasy life path generator kind of thing for making characters. And she then went on, or her and the team that wrote it. I don't know if she actually wrote it specifically. I don't even recall her name and her name being on the original one. But it was originally out by Task Force Games, and then they did Heroes of Now and Heroes of Tomorrow, which were a modern and then sci-fi life path generators. They were generic, which was neat, so they could be used in any setting. But the redo of the central casting book has me really intrigued because central casting is a title that could be turned easily into a more universal product that covered all genres or maybe had sections for genres. Um, so I'm looking forward to that one. Um, Hunger. I prefer Shadowpunk. No, I prefer Cyberpunk. Um, I I tried Shadowrun and I like the idea of Shadowrun, but for me, I prefer a more I'm not gonna say pure because I definitely messed up and muddied up my own Cyberpunk games, but I like the the grittier, edgier, non-magical Cyberpunk. Awesome. I'm glad you found it, and I'm glad it's still out there. His blog, by the way, is great to look at too. If you ever track down the author's blog, um, 30 BattleTech minis. You and your son. That's cool. So, um, Mecha Studios, his kids are lucky because he's a prop maker and a pro level painter. So, gonna have some great battle mechs there. So lucky kids. Let's see. Let's see. Hey, the geek has arrived. 4-1, his son's team won. Awesome. Congratulations. Um, they're out there playing the real football, their football. But let's see. Questions. Everybody. I can't remember what Hungar's got us. I think the highest he's ever got us was Ugly Dorks, but yeah. But it's cool to see that games like Far Trek and stuff are still out there. There's a lot of, I mean, I was a big blogger for a while. My blog's still out there. In fact, I had several. Icy Lead People was my blog for the longest time, and it was a generic, um, just gaming blog, um, miniatures, RPGs. General geeky dorkiness. I also had Crisis in Alcovia. Alcovia was my fictional Baltic nation that was going through a modern civil war. It became uncomfortable to work on that project when in 2014 when the Ukraine kind of blew up, and I realized it was just a little too close to reality. So I kind of slowed down on that. But yeah, I used to participate in a few blogs back when blogs were a big thing. They still are in some spheres, like in the OSR. You got the Alexandrian stuff like that. Um, so, um, other games that I can suggest that are low cost introductions um, into like sci-fi RPGs. If you want a more generic one, there's a game called Explorers. That's X hyphen Plorers. Um, it is a humans only kind of gritty sci-fi, well, gritty-ish sci-fi RPG that is done very old school. Um, but it's got like 4 core classes, and then rules for creatures and spaceships, and it was pretty good. Um, your son was confused because there's a stream on in the car. Come on, he knows about streams. He's hip with the jive of the modern technology, I'm sure. Um, no, I really do like finding little gems of games that I can play. Uh, my current obsession is the old micro games, from like Task Force and Dwarf Star and stuff like that. Um, I missed most of those when I was younger. I didn't see the appeal. They always they missed the mark with young Eli when they were still on the pegs. But nowadays, they're genius. A little polymer envelope with rules, counters, and a whole game. And it's an amazing concept. But the nice thing is, at least for Dwarf Star, they've placed several of their games uh, on a website with the rules that you can download now, and color scans of their counter sheets. So you could go back and play those games. Um, I even wrote a mini game, just kind of because with the ADHD, you follow the dopamine, and so I wrote a little mini game set in the Star Frontiers universe that I'm gonna submit to the Frontier Explorer magazine, like you used to have in the old Dragon magazines. So it's a kind of just a beer and pretzels light hunting game set on Volturnus. So that one should be fun. Let's see. Grocery store this morning with my OSE shirt. Huh, nice. Yeah, that's a thing I've heard a few things about. There are bars that are hosting game nights. I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, I remember when gaming was the sort of thing that got you stuffed in a locker or a Bible thumped at you. But now it's, it's literally beer and pretzels at the local bar for game night, and that's just wild. Uh, you know, uh, I it is a golden age of gaming. Whether you like all of the games that are coming out and whether you agree with everything that everybody's doing in gaming, there's no denying that if you like games of any kind, miniatures, role playing, even card games, board games, it's just the best time. There's just no way to go wrong with what's out there. You can find groups. If you're looking. I always complain about I have a hard time finding people, but people to begin with, but I really don't try. And that I got my own hangups. I'm not a huge fan of playing with strangers. I really need to be comfortable with people to be able to sit down and play an RPG with them. Um, and so often I have to meet people, become their friends, or meet them through an existing gaming group. But yeah, I mean, if you are much more outgoing, you're gonna find games. Let's see. Um, it can be grumpy. It can be. I find the easiest way to explain it that always works for me is just to flat out say, well, the only there is no win because, well, let me back up. You win if you had fun, which is kind of a nebulous thing, but there is a win condition. The idea that there is no win in RPGs is, I think, a bit of an obfuscation because I think we can all agree that when you beat the module or the adventure or the scenario or you solve the mystery, you've won. It's a temporary victory, especially in a campaign. But I think if we were to compare apples to apples and go with like a one shot with a more conventional, gaming, other, experience and say like a board game or a card game, there's definitely a win. Um, and there's a loss. I mean, if you're going through a Call of Cthulhu one shot and everybody dies or goes insane, I would say there's the esoteric win in that like we all won because we had a good time, but we lost. So let's see. Yeah, those are cool. And I keep hearing about more and more of this popping up. Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, there is so much that can just be printed nowadays. I have notebooks full of games, 3 ring binders, and it got to the point where because 3 ring binders don't shelf store very easily, I went out and bought a comb binder, and I just started comb binding my stuff. Uh, let's see. Yeah, and that's the thing. Let 5e lead the way. It'll get people into the hobby because it's easily accessible. But just as a lot of us are multi-game people, even multi-genre people, um, there's always going to be people in 5e, and not all of them, and that's okay. But there's always going to be people in 5e who are going to look at the next table and go, "Oh, that looks cool," or that once they know what an RPG is and they're in the local shop or they're scrolling around online or whatever, the next RPG is is more likely to now jump out and kind of slap them in the face and make them notice. Uh, oh yeah, well back in the day, it was. I remember having people tell me that gaming was for sissies. Um, or soft kids or sensitive kids because we used our imaginations and we played make believe. Um, so yeah, I get you there. Let's see. Well, that's good, Omen. I would say if he's a clerk at your local store, then you definitely have a chance to interact with him more and just kind of help foster that youngling enthusiasm. Ah, yes. It was never about the adventure. It was the friends we made along the way. True, but cheesy as fuck. So I think we're far enough into the stream, and I'm not monetized anyways, so I don't care. Uh, win equals don't die. I will. I mean, if we're talking about the esoteric win, you can win even by dying. I think if everybody in Call of Cthulhu game goes insane and dies in spectacular fashion, and everybody's laughing and had a riot, have a good time, then we're all good. I mean, I've blown up my own Star Wars character on purpose because it was fun. Let's see. Traveler or Star Trek or something else for the sci-fi itch. Yeah, there are so many games. Um, I mean, I keep saying it. They're just I've got a shelf full of games, and several of them I've never played before because there are the go-tos of Star Trek, Star Wars. I've never played Traveler, never. When back in the day, I was very much a fantasy guy, and then Star Frontiers came along, and I don't know if it was brand loyalty or just name recognition, but TSR in a big shiny box, it was really easy for me to pick up. That's another one that's available still. You can go on to Drive Through RPG, you can buy the PDFs, you can even get print on demands. That's the nice thing. Print on demand has made the old stuff alive again without having to pay insane collector's prices. I remember not too long ago being able to, before the D&D boom hit, being able to go into half price books and pick up old D&D stuff dirt cheap, or old gaming stuff. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. Musings, or mages musings. Uh, it's a hard concept for a lot of people to conceive of. Be Culturally, we just don't think of it that way. I mean, I think we're always taught, you know, you know, who won the game. When you play Monopoly against your sister, or one of the first questions that your relatives will ask you is, oh, who won? You know, playing video games. I think it's kind of funny if you think about it. Old, original, first generation video games um, were better for teaching the non-zero sum uh, victory condition because it was all a matter of high score. It wasn't a matter of um, you know uh, yes, I beat the game. It's just, what was your score? So you're playing for to see how far you can get and how good it was. Saxius finally arrived. Uh, Welcome, Saxius. It can be if you're playing the wrong game. Uh, let's see. And Omen, I just assumed, but yeah, I guess it's very possible. 42 years old. 10, 15 games show off last night. See, I'm trying to catch up with you guys now. Woo! Looking for actual questions now, or actual things I can speak to. Yes, POD is such a save. It's good, and the nice thing about POD too, and the PDFs is you can buy a PDF and not have to commit to putting it on your shelf or printing it out, but then you can if you want. So it kind of allows you to progress. Like maybe that game just isn't good enough to invest that next step in. Um, all right, Merlinster Gandaldor. Uh, Another one. I mean, Stars Without Number is not a bad system. It's got a lot for if you're just getting into sci-fi, but it'll let you play just about anything. Yes, old video games. I love how early on the only way that they really had to get harder was to go faster. Excellent. All right. Well, I've caught up to the chat. Yay, me. Um, but yeah, seems like the role playing crowd showed up. That's who knows me. But it's funny is I posted the link to this chat on a couple of the miniatures sites that I'm known on, and I'm wondering if I'll get anybody there from there to show up. I'm sure if Squirrel Hermit were here, he'd be picking my brain on the miniatures front. Um, yeah, there are some systems that when they say free, I'm just like, why charge? I charge $5 at least. A good example. I personally I will take advantage of a pay what you want, but I really think that anybody lists their stuff as pay what you want is selling themselves short. I often go back and pay for things that I've picked up and then appreciated. Uh, I mentioned in one of my previous streams Mike Cretchett's Verrettwood miniatures game. He's getting ready to publish it on I think on Drive Through, and we were discussing pricing. And I'm like, dude, you should charge for it. I mean, yes, it's only a short game, but you put a lot of work and a lot of effort into it. Yeah, it's definitely worth putting a price tag on. Uh, Echo, yeah, there are a lot of games out there that are not going to use a D20 that are so worth playing. I like percentile system games, Star Frontiers, Justifiers, which is sort of my own little niche pet RPG favorite. Um, Call of Cthulhu, while not sci-fi, uh, although it could be. Sandy Peterson's actually written sci-fi scenarios for Call of Cthulhu. Um, let's see. Yeah, I try. It's let's see. So my problem with the bundles I'm holding, Omen, is that usually they have a lot of stuff that I don't want, and I don't necessarily want to grab a bunch of crap that I'm not going to use or don't need. What house rule I can't do without when I DM? I'm assuming Dungeons and Dragons because you use DM. Um, that is a hard one. I've been at it long enough to where I have to think and try and remember what is a house rule and what's an actual rule. Um, I the one that we use a lot, at least for in fifth edition, for example, is flanking. It's not in the rules, um, but I do like flanking. Yeah. You will be. You definitely will be. That's a giant positive. We're just gonna say Hungar will be on the stream. Let's see. I have a story about this one. So Grumpy, when I was in my mid-20s in the roommate days, I had a very low cost of living. I had about $600 a month disposable income. And on the bus route back from work, because I commuted from uh, the suburbs to Seattle, to downtown Seattle, was our game store. It's a place I've been going to since high school, even though it moved a few times. And I would go in there on paydays with my paycheck burning a hole in my pocket, and I would go up to the register and I would be ready to check out, and the guy who ran the store would just kind of he was doing his own thing, and I got sick of it. So one day I go up there and I have my stack of stuff, like books, like bam, right? It's when World of Darkness was big, and Rifts was pumping out stuff, and so, um, And every time I would ask him to come check me out, and he didn't, I would just take a few things and set them in another pile. And when he came over, and I'm like, okay, here, I handed him the diminished pile. And I'm like, he'd bring it up, and he'd be like, do you want, and these two? I'm like, no, those are the ones I was going to buy, but the impulse has passed. And then I would leave. And with his stack of shame on his counter, he was also bad at ordering things. Like, I had a friend who we were doing micro armor, and he had ordered helicopters that were 2 to a pack, and Scott, the store owner, um, ordered him twice as many, um, because he took the total number of helicopters and converted that to total number of packs, and then tried to make my friend pay for all of them. Yeah, so game store owners were their own worst enemy. Um, BK Dan, I am not. I'm not a huge fan of Pathfinder. Um, I Yeah, it's, as the descendant of Third Edition, which is a game that I was happy to get out of. I am not looking to dip a toe back into that. I've never heard of. I've heard of Wicked Ones only through you. I've never actually played it or seen it. Uh, it's when Geek mentions Call of Cthulhu that we drank, not me. So we're safe. It's too early for booze, at least where I am. Let's see. TG Smith, welcome. That is a name I have not seen on my streams before, nor BK Dan. So cool. We got some folks coming in. That is true. But I think, and Lovecraft very much considered himself a science fiction writer, because really there is a science to his stuff. And he very much was on that Arthur C. Clarke kind of. I think it's Clarke. Yeah, maybe quoting the technology so advanced that it would be considered magic, whatever the quote is. He was very much on that forefront. Rule of no. Do you mean, like, do I use the rule of no, Omen? I do like to say no when I run games. And it I don't think any GM should be afraid to say no, but I am, I guess, in a lot of respects. And I'm very much a moderate when it comes to running games. I would rather say no but, or no and, rather than just flat out no. No to me is an invitation for a discussion with the player. And often this has resulted in wonderful additions to my campaign that I haven't thought about. So I cannot recommend just flat out saying no all the time. There's certainly places for no, uh, but hear them out. You might be surprised. Um, so yeah, that's my position on no, if that's what you meant. Do you keep kids in dungeons? Welcome to the stream. That's a name I have not encountered. Do I keep kids in dungeons? Well, when my household expanded, I did have to build a bedroom in the garage back when I lived in Washington State. We had 2 kids living out there. So a small garage room, I guess, could constitute a dungeon. But then my kids are all gamers, so it's basically stocking the dungeon. So, let's Let's see. I am in the dungeon now. I have a basement now, so I can actually hang out down here and do the gaming thing as much as I want. Let's see. Let's see. All right, non-D20 games. What about Palladium? Uh, Palladium, let me be a hot take, is a hot mess. I love it and I hate it. So Palladium is the result early of an early RPGer who really liked D&D, but also really liked things like RuneQuest and all of that, and decided to glom them together. Although, to be fair, early RuneQuest was exactly the same thing. Your attributes were generated, and actually current RuneQuest, because current RuneQuest is not 7th edition Chaosium. Why? Current RuneQuest is that as well. Skills based around percentiles, and then um, attributes that are a combination of d6 generated and then calculated through combinations of other ones. I do like Palladium's fantasy universe. If Kevin Simbita could ever pull his thumb out, um, and he has I don't know what special magic Savage Worlds has, but they have been able to like sprinkle some weird funky pixie dust over Kevin Simbita and got him to let them play in his sandbox. I think that the Palladium campaign world is just perfect for porting out to other systems if Palladium's not your system. It's a nice old school fantasy setting. Definitely worth playing in. I'm assuming, Hungar, you're referring to my Punishment of the Game Store guy. Yeah. I'm catching up to the stream. Everybody, maybe talking about sheds and dungeons. I have no idea what you're talking about there. Whoa. I'm sure Geek would be happy to take a drink every time we mention Call of Cthulhu. Let's see. So I have actually I've really considered actually running a dark, kind of gritty fantasy game using the Call of Cthulhu system. There is a Cthulhu Dark Ages. Um, the last version of it was the 6th edition, which is before they did all the major improvements that made Call of Cthulhu really sing. Um, but the neat thing is that the the magic of 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, 7th edition Chaosium, if you want to call it, is that because they use simple math to convert from when they change the system, everything is just simple math to convert from previous editions. So it's simple enough to where you can do it on the fly. So anything 6th edition easily translates to 7th edition. So you could take Cthulhu Dark Ages, which has really good, um, beefier rules for hand-to-hand combat, and the things that are important for a medieval setting, um, and then run it in 7th edition where you have the nice fluid mechanics. And the neat thing is, in the transition from 6th to 7th, is that um, the way 7th edition works, you don't have to worry about any kind of new calculations or conversions for getting away from the resistance table in the older editions, because it manages to handle that in itself with just what your skill levels are. Um, Dark Ages has an interesting twist on sanity in that because the Dark Ages is a time of death, disease, and cruelty and suffering and just general violence. Those things don't bug people. Um, it is actually the concept of and even actually some supernatural things don't shake them as much as they would because they believe it's there and it exists in their minds. So it really takes it takes a lot more to shake somebody in a Cthulhu Dark Ages setting. All right. Do do do. Well, I'm glad you did discover me. I am trying to rebuild the channel, and it's been dormant for a long time. That has Geek has helped that, putting me on his streams and getting me back in that frame of mind. It's put me here. So yeah. Um, in that I can't afford anything more. Yes. Merps. Yeah. Um, especially when you get into rifts, and even once you're in rifts, even making characters can be a bit of a grind because you have to go through 9 million source books to find what you're really looking for. Uh, that is a good call. Um, I think with the power level of Palladium's character generation, fifth edition isn't too far off. Let's see. Yeah, hitting that point where I have to look through the questions some more. And Gingerbeard, welcome. Thank you for coming in. That's awesome. This is one of the things that I don't really get to enjoy because I tend to run homebrew. I don't experience that glee of getting new adventures in as much. Part of the reason for nowadays, part of my reason for running so much homebrew is just that I can't afford to keep up with the the publication schedule of most companies nowadays. Um, I really have to pick and choose what I buy, um, and yeah, so there's that as well. You are indeed to blame for resurrecting me and bringing me back like some kind of mohawked lich to the internet. Fast character generation is good. I feel like there are times where a slower where a more involved character generation is important, but that's in games where it matters. Call of Cthulhu, for example, while I wouldn't call it necessarily heavy character generation, it's definitely not fast. But it's not the slowest in the world. Um, but even a relatively simple system can have a pretty involved character generation. I don't know how many times I have had to struggle to explain how the D6 character generation works. For whatever reason, the concept of individual pips on a die um, being something you allocate on skills is hard for folks to grasp, especially considering in the D6 system, for example, you assign whole die or up to 3 pips, but anything over 3 pips, you're assigning a full other die. Um, because it's a D6, dice pool system. So anything over 3 is really, you might as well just have another die. But that sticks people. That's hard. But it's a simple system. But yeah, it definitely is. Can slow it down. All right, so we have hit our first hour mark. Had some good questions coming in. I had a chance to do a few little rambles. I'm gonna take a drink of coffee and refresh my vocal cords. Uh, I can hear my wife stirring up above, so I don't know if that's the dog waking her up or what, but it's not going to impact us down here. She knows I'm on the stream. So to the new folks who came here, I hope you're finding what you were looking for. I can certainly speak to many a game system and many a concept, um, miniatures and role playing games, hobby in general. Last night, I was just sharing with some friends a set of miniatures rules that I had picked up ages ago. That is a rules system for constructing and fighting mecha combats out of Lego. And it uses really simple designs. So it's not like you have to be a master builder, but it has a great section on this is how you build a ray dome out of Lego. These kind of Lego weapons represent autocannons. This is how you would build a laser. It's really cool. It's fun stuff. Hungar, rest up. We'll see you soon, and thanks for coming by. Hungar is a fun guy. He comes in and cheers us on in Geek Stream on midweek Geek. So all right. Oh, so let's see. Uh, Looks like uh, we may have problems. Just a moment. All right, dealt with. We had some inappropriate comments coming in from one of our new visitors. So, what shall we talk about for the next hour? Other than Mage's Musings issues with autocorrect. One thing I would like to ask. So people have come back to the channel through my streams. This is just kind of warm ups for me. I would like to continue streams, but um, what sort of, I guess, what kind of topics would you like to see actual in videos on? I mean, I can talk to a lot of stuff, but one of the reasons I stopped doing my channel originally was I felt like I was um, kind of talking to the wind. Um, but now I have over 100 followers, and that's crazy because in like the years of my channel before, I barely made it there. Favorite miniature skirmish game by genre? Um, um, of the ones I have played, fantasy would be Mordheim. Um, that old school Games Workshop. Um, uh, Mechanic is so easy to play through, and it homebrews so nicely with that wide stat block. Um, it really allows you to create and adjust. By sci-fi, skirmish wise, of the ones I've played, I gotta say old school Necromunda. Yet again another Games Workshop one. However, um, Stargrave is good. I've read through it but haven't played it. Um, Actually, if you want an interesting light rules, and I just happen to have this handy, is this game, Rogue Stars. This is one of Osprey's Blue Book games, so it'll cost you maybe $20, but it's a warband uh, skirmish game, very much in the vein of old Rogue Trader. thus the name. That one's fun. Pulp gaming, and this is a good one that can go into so many different genres. There's no beating Pulp Alley. Dave Phipps has struck gold with that system. I have bought into, built up, and sold off an entire collection of pulp miniatures for another system, which I regret. Never sell anything. Never sell any gaming stuff. But Pulp Alley is the sweetest spot. It'll play Conan fights, it'll play Lovecraftian horror crawls, it'll play the Phantom, it will play um, aerial aces, it will play, anything with that in that pulp vibe. And I've seen people use it for Star Wars because it has, in addition to like rules for leagues of skilled individuals, it also has rules for like clumps of generic mooks. So you can easily place a crap ton of stormtroopers, or like I built a scenario where the two leagues are going through an old desert fort trying to find something in the middle of a fight between uh, locals and the Foreign Legion. And so the game has mechanics for AI controlled monsters, it has solo play rules. Pulp Alley is likely one of the best miniature skirmish games to come out. Um, but those are the three main genres that I play in. Modern Warfare, I haven't had a chance to play through a lot of systems. I've collected stuff, but not really had a chance to play. Cliff notes of my RPG beginnings, year-end system. I was in third grade, so it would have been 1981. It was whichever D&D box set was new then. I kind of blur what was new in 81. I want to say it was the Moldvay, but I may be wrong because I was 8. And I've shared this story before. I accidentally ran into D&D. I had moved out of the neighborhood, visited the old neighborhood again, went over to my friend's house. He had D&D. We played it wrong. I fell in love. I tried to recreate it, and I've been obsessed ever since. So that's my beginnings. Yes, he's teasing me because I have created, as much as I don't like Palladium, I do like things like Robotech and Macross. And so I've had this project that I've been working on for a while just for fun as a campaign I would like to run, which is the story of what was happening on the Soviet anti-unification side of things during the Macross saga. And I've nicknamed it Robotech Red. So it's in the old style of Harmony Gold 2, we're kind of mashing together mecha designs from different shows to create our vision of what a Soviet Eastern Bloc. And it's not even Soviet because the anti-unification in Macross also included groups like Germany and stuff like that. But um, it it got a little easier when Macross Zero came out because they actually showed what the Russian Veritex looked like, which are badass. They're based on the Su-27s. Why the stereotype of 40k Imperial Guard being for treadheads, tank fans is the worst thing that ever happened to the army? This is a direct byproduct of the sales and marketing for by GW. I have been playing, and I'm just preaching to the choir here, Gingerbeard. I've been playing since they were called the Imperial Army, and they were allowed to have dreadnoughts and beastmen, and they had all sorts of cool little things like rapier, multi-lasers, mole mortars, thud guns. They had war robots. They were definitely a fancier army, a lot more nuanced in the way they had jump packs. You had penal legions, bomb bots. But the tanks sell. Tanks are big, large models that people can pay way too much money for and feel like they feel like they actually got something, and it looks good. And I fell for that. I mean, when I was it third edition, fourth edition, I had 4 Lehman Russ, 2 Demolishers, 5 Chimeras, and tanks are cool, but I also had 100 infantry in metal of Valhallans at the time. And then I had maxed out my Ogrins and my Ratlings and all of that. And I was still using my Rapiers and my Thud guns and stuff because I only played friendly games. But yes, it it is bad. I I I honestly think that in a war game, different army compositions should be viable. Um, and so that is, um, hold on a second. I need to respond to my wife. But yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think you should be able to play an all infantry army and still be able to compete and have fun. And the Warhammer lore allows for that because they have man portable weapons of insane power. So let's see. There aren't two one-es. There is one-e is pretty much universally AD&D, and then there's OD&D, which is really the first edition, but not what everybody refers to. When will I be painting the wall behind me in some Elmore mural? When I can afford to have Larry Elmore paint my wall. Uh, let's see. Yeah, I am a mecha head. Um, I have at I've bought but still don't have every edition of the Mechton RPG from Artel Sorian, which is an RPG that will let you build and play any mecha from any genre. So yeah, that's a good one. The neat thing is that the current version of Mechton, they have 2 books. They have the rule book for the RPG, which has mecha construction rules in it that are really light and straightforward and allow are everything you need to have mecha for a role playing game focused game. And then they have the mecha manual, which is a very nitty gritty nuts and bolts build all your subsystems, combine it into a mecha. You can build everything from small little robot dogs to giant planet busting spaceships. It's a cool system. Yeah, Echo. Yeah, D&D. There's a lot to it. I mean, the second edition transition, where I mean, second edition is really AD&D with some extra stuff sprinkled in. Um, as far as I understand it, second edition is the D&D they could get away with, not the D&D they wanted to make. Um, because they wanted to do a lot more with it, and I think we actually got to see that when the players options books came out. That's true, but there was an actual Dungeons and Dragons before 1E, um, and it was born out of things like chainmail. I will probably not end up painting my walls, to be honest, because I don't mind the gray, but also they will more than likely end up covered by shelves. So, um, because this behind me is only a part of it. Like directly behind me, it will be my painting desk, um, and to the left of that, so is well, left is that's all flocks and spray paints and basing material, and the totes to the side of me, those are all bits and bobs, and to the direct, right of me, that is, you know, drawers. I mean, right here, I've got $600 worth of Dwarven Forge. Um, and then the metal shelf that's all terrain that's too big to fit on a normal shelf. And then along that whole wall is more bookshelves and sorting tables while I get everything organized. And then against the far wall are hanging shelves that has all my miniatures on it. So once I'm done, I just got a couple of nice glass fronted display cases. I picked those up used. They're all lit and everything too. So um, um, as I paint stuff, it's going to go in there. Probably even the unpainted stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, I being ADHD, and you'll hear me mention it a lot because it's very much real in my life. Uh, Getting stuff out of boxes where I can see it is good because I tend to not work on stuff if I don't see it. Um, in fact, a lot of my current projects are going back and coming up with fun things to do with things I've had sitting around. Let's see. It's definitely worth getting, but the latest versions are the best written. There's a lot of cool accessories. In addition to Mekton and Mekton Zeta, which are the core rule books for the current, well, and when I say current, the last version, they haven't done a new one. There is also Mekton the movie, which is a subsystem that's in the game screen, which you can download. Mekton the movie was a mass combat system for Mekton, so you could get those really big battles in there. So absolutely, shelves are wallpaper. Um, and the geek just showed us the lineage of D&D. um, yeah, before Mold Day Basic, wasn't there the one early box set that they had with the blue and white box cover with the dragon on it? Can't remember. Yeah, that's the Holmes Basic. You already put it in there. Never mind. Helps if I read. Yeah, Echo. I am old enough to where it was not a thing that was recognized in kids. So I was very much the spaz, the sensitive kid, the kid who didn't pay attention in class, the unmotivated kid. Um, uh, and so I just learned to live with it. And, you know, it's, at 50, I put forward a really good face. But once I became aware of what was going on, the more I learned about it, um, it did help me deal with a lot of it, but it also helped me like get on top of the things that were hindering me. Like knowing why something is happening in my brain really helps me to work around that. So yeah, absolutely. Out of sight, gone. What's funny is I used to feel horrible about not calling and talking to my parents all the time. And I realized that this concept of out of sight and gone extends to people. Um, and so I don't feel as bad because it's not like I never thought about my mom, never cared about my mom or anything like that. It's just like there's uh, that what does they call it? Executive dysfunction, I think is what it is, where um, the act of doing something is is hindered by, of course, out of sight, out of mind. Uh, yeah, it does not help to be disorganized like I am. I even when I try to organize things, like that shelf with all the flocks and spray paints and stuff was so much cleaner when I first set it up. I remember there was an adult gamer in my life when I was a kid. Um, he was a cool guy, uh, but he had it, and that was the first box set I saw outside of the one that my friend had. My very first D&D purchase of all things was the Fiend Folio. I picked it up at Fred Meyer, and you know, it was just there on the shelf. How can you not want to grab the metal as fuck cover that is the Githyanki with the sword as a kid? I didn't even know what was in it. I flipped through it. There were monsters in it. That cover was awesome. It's a D&D book, and it's probably the oddest entry into D&D you could ever get, or into D&D products you could ever get, because it is so different from the other monster manuals. Even the types of monsters that enter in are just a little bit more wacky and a little bit more grim. Yeah, it's so funny because I had a first grade teacher who my mother almost beat up, um, who got up in front of the class, told everybody in the class that I was going to be a garbage man when I grew up because I couldn't keep my desk neat and tidy. Um, a kid like me, who was admittedly raised with a level of emotional awareness that made me way different than most boys, especially in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, who was then also ADHD and dyslexic. Um, yeah, I was a pick onable, which is D&D. Everybody talks about the things at D&D. D&D gave me a place to belong and friends to have. Um, uh, so may if for that reason alone, I think it's always been firmly ensconced in my life, gaming in general. Um, because I was one of those kids who got pulled out of class once a week to go talk to go spend an hour with the school psychiatrist or school psychologist, whatever the position is, and just because I was not adjusting. Wasn't that I wasn't adjusting, just I didn't like anybody because they were all so dumb. Yeah, they were dumb and they were mean and they were horrible, and I was well aware of that. Um, I wasn't having any of it. But yeah, the idea it's so funny because everybody nowadays is like, "Oh, look what's in this regular old store. It's D&D." I'm like, "Yes, we also had that back in the day before people lost their shit over it." Sears had it, J.C. Penney had it, Walden Books. I mean, Walden Books was a great place for gaming. Um, yeah, yeah, it's funny story. That same first grade teacher, I ran into her of all places, well outside of our neighborhood, and years later, my grandfather lived in Sacramento, and I would spend the summers down with him. And every so often, he would drive up the coast, pick us up, and we would do a sort of a camping drive back down the Pacific coast, back down to Sacramento. Great drive and lots of places. But we stopped at a Red Lion Inn to eat dinner one night, and from behind me, in the booth behind us, I hear an unforgettable voice of this woman who had terrorized me in first grade. She had spanked me in front of the class actually too, which my mother was having none of. But and I stood up from in the booth and turned around and looked at her, and the idea of seeing an adult express terror at the sight of an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, whatever age I was, a small child, um, was amusing. My grandparents didn't know what was going on, and then when we left, I'm like, "That was my first grade teacher. She was a bitch." And my grandparents were like surprised at what I had said. I'm like, "No, you have to understand, she really is." But um, yeah, Walden Books, B. Dalton. Um, where I lived, we actually had a toy store in the mall that had a really decent gaming section for what a toy store would have, because it was a little bit more than a toy store. The bottom store was basic toys and novelties, and then next to the register was kind of a half wall of gaming stuff, pegboards for minis up top, shelving for boxed games, and books below. And then the upstairs was a full on model shop. So it was a really cool store. But it was in the mall, and that was neat. It was Ralph's Toys. Yeah, Ralph's Toys. Um, it's not there anymore. But we also had a massive store locally called American Eagles. It was actually owned and operated by an old German dude and his son had got him to bring gaming stuff in really early on, because he was very much a scale models and historical wargaming guy. That store was giant. It was big enough to where not only was it a store, it was actually a distributor for the local shops as well. Uh, but yeah, so it yeah, there was a there was I remember there used to be, and my wife chuckles at me sometimes because we can't go past like a strip mall without me going, back in the 80s there'd be a game store there, because back in the day it just seems like they were everywhere. I'd go visit my cousin, for the summer, and we'd go to the mall, and there'd be a game store, or there'd be a comic shop that also did games. Um, but yeah, they were everywhere. Damn you, internet! You ruined it all. But cool. So not a lot of questions coming in. We have about a half an hour left, so now's the time to get them in if you want to. Let's see, how many people do we have? We have 10 people watching. That's pretty good. That's biggest I've ever had. It's pretty good. Let's see. And yeah, 10 is not bad, especially for me, where I'm like, not really a big name. I'm not even a small name, but yeah, you know, on this one, I would say there's probably a group, and they're probably not even human, that are out there looking for streams to go live. Favorite prehistoric animals, monsters. Um, like most kids, I started out being really huge on dinosaurs. Um, as I got older, I started to really appreciate prehistoric mammals, and there's just and over time, just it all kind of comes together. Being a sci-fi guy too, I think it really feeds into itself, because it's a great place to mine for what alien life could look like. I have based one of my alien races after woolly rhinos. Um, Slightly different, but woolly rhinos. Um, and Yeah, I mean, I've got an entire miniatures range of velociraptors in space. That one is a fun story to tell, because when I first came up with the idea, and it's not dinosaurs with guns is not a really foreign or original idea, but the specific idea of taking velociraptor type dinosaurs, the smart dinosaurs, and giving them guns and sci-fi gear, uh, I shopped it around to a bunch of miniatures companies who had, like Eureka Miniatures, for example, who had done like their 100 club, 300 clubs, which were a sort of suggested, and if we get enough people interested in early proto crowdfunding before it was a thing, and then they would make it. Um, it is also because of that thing, that range, that I have like 300 6mm sci-fi German miniatures, because to get them pushed through, I bought all 300 of the minimum order that it needed. But anyway, so I shopped this idea around for the Space Raptors, and I was told multiple times that it wasn't really a marketable idea. Uh, And so when I decided to pull the trigger and start my own miniatures range, Loud Ninja games were sold through alternative armies, mostly 15 millimeter sci-fi. I had to lead the way with Space Raptors, and the I did a Kickstarter. This was in the earliest days of Kickstarters when you could come in with nothing except for an idea and maybe a couple of pieces of concept art and actually get people to back it. But it was also early enough to where nobody had really figured it out, and I ended up paying something like 6 grand out of pocket on that one. But I got the miniatures range out, and it's popular. And so it was a giant thumb your nose at all the people who told me no. I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna go make my own miniatures range, but with blackjack and hookers. Uh, that's kind of where how I did it. And I'm not a very active company. It's more of a small boutique thing, but yeah. Uh, yeah, everybody hit that like button and do the subscribey thing and the bell thingy, and now I feel cheap. But yeah, I think the time is right, honestly. When I was trying to do it, I don't think there was a space for, say, a guy on his headset in his unfinished basement talking hobbies with his stuff behind him. There is that space now, and so I think the times have changed and the worm has turned, as I would say. An extra question: what do you think about Reaper Minis going the way of 3D printing their products? I think it's a good idea. Um, as far as I understand it, they're not. I didn't think that they were actually doing a full 3D printing for their range. I thought they were just 3D printing their masters or making 3D printing available. COcast is a good way to go. And actually, they were kind of on the forefront of the COcast stuff. I've seen COcast. I've held COcast. It's actually good stuff too. I'm a fan of 3D printing. I think 3D printing for production has some issues that I'm hoping they've addressed, because there's definitely finishing work. But at the same time, there's always been some finishing work in miniatures, mold lines, flash, um, things like that. So I don't see that it's too huge of a deal. What I really do like is some of the hybrid production I've been seeing, where some of the plastics companies who do the big, expensive injection molded plastic, like Victrix and War Games Atlantic, for example, who are supplementing their ranges with 3D offerings that are, for people to print on their own. The neat thing is this allows those companies to use their customer base to back these explorations of miniatures that wouldn't necessarily be popular enough to pull enough buyers to justify the injection molding, but there's still a market for. For example, civilians. People always want civilians in ranges, but civilians don't really sell. So for a company to actually go through and do injection molded civilians is a big undertaking that they're just going to eat and have to spread the cost around. Um, Niche armies is another one. Why haven't you done 14th century Upper East Siders, or whatever, and that's because there's like 5 people who would want that. Um, the other thing is too is, like, for example, with War Games Atlantic, a lot of period troops are very similar, but maybe just differences in weapons or headgear, and that's like the style. So what this allows them to do is have, say, like a box of Dark Age infantry, and then do headsets and arm sets that can be 3D printed for those ranges, that you can then uh, make them look more correct, even though there might be some little fiddly nuanced details that are not correct. But that's for the button counters and the lace guys. Um, this is Mike from Verretwood. Um, as I mentioned earlier, he's getting ready to push out his rules. So everybody look for Verretwood. If you want a folk horror themed skirmish game that has quick play and very characterful armies that fosters the idea of art in miniatures and do it yourself, because it's miniatures agnostic. The final vision of what your game world looks like is going to be completely up to you and your friends who you're playing with. Uh, Keep an eye out for Verrewood. It's definitely good stuff. And Mike does amazing photos with simple tools that I'm pretty sure is witchcraft. So that comment has another thing coming. So funny thing is when I made my dino my space raptors, every alien race I make from my miniatures range has an internal logic and a story behind it. It helps me guide the creativity and the development of the product range to where it creates some cohesion. I had basically decided that early on that the Chewhawk, who are the Dino Raptors, um, the Space Raptors, didn't know exactly where their home world was. They just knew that what they called their home wasn't their original planet, but what they had figured out was that they had left whatever world they came from about 65 million years ago, Earth time. And also, when they had first encounters with humans out in space, in interstellar space out there, and the two races did science on each other, they realized that they shared some DNA, and yeah, so it was never I never flat out came and said they were from Earth, but yeah, they were from Earth. They're the original Earthlings. Yeah, it's what's funny is later on there would be a couple of novel series about exactly raptors with guns, and now everybody thinks I copied them. Uh, yeah, I mean, I could show some of that. I'd have to find a way to find it. I don't. Let me take a look here real quick. I used to draw a lot. I don't draw as much nowadays, but I used to. And the I used to draw silly things like, let me see if I can find it. Having to flip through the screens here. And just a moment here. Where is that tab? No. So it doesn't look. Here it is. Here's a funny one I did. This is just me goofing around. If it'll actually come up or not. Well, that's disappointing. Well, it doesn't seem to want to work today, so I won't be doing it. But yeah, I will definitely show off some art at some point. Maybe I'll throw it up on the Discord. Um, let's see what else we got here. Yeah, I think Kickstarter is, yeah, as I was mentioning. So for an existing miniatures company to invest in niche miniatures is a big risk to them. Kickstarter, however, removes the risk. Um, Removes the risk from the companies. I like that, and I hate that. Um, I feel like offloading the risk onto the consumer makes for lazy companies who they really don't have to work as hard to earn people's business, but it does make things like non-combatants and stuff more viable because you can put it out there and then all the people who want it will buy it, and you don't have to put it into production so much. You can just do limited runs. Yeah, Gingerbeard, you will dig his stuff. I would say it shares DNA with the Blanchitsu movement in that whole kind of desaturated, um, grizzly style. It's definitely good stuff. So StreamYard, it was funny is I've had no problem getting it to show other windows before. I don't know if it necessarily just didn't like the window that was an art program. Um, I can definitely try again and see. No, it's still not working. That is so weird. All right, but have I ever come across realistic medieval armor and weapons minis? Yes, they're called historicals. Um, and you can get them for super cheap. There are also a number of 3D printable ranges that do this. But if you were looking for realistic medieval armor and weapons, look at historical ranges. Specifically, I can recommend uh, Perry Miniatures. The Perry brothers are phenomenal sculptors with a very realistic edge. Even when they were sculpting for Warhammer, they tended to be the more grounded designs. But Victrix is also a good company. That's Victrix. They do historicals, and they are a phenomenal deal. I bought a bag of Norman Foot Knights. It was 60 miniatures for $45. Let that soak in, and then consider GW prices. And the quality of these miniatures in terms of sculpting is every bit as solid as anything from Games Workshop. But the Perry's very similar to the Perry's. You'll get like maybe 30 miniatures for or 20 miniatures for like $30. It's not bad. I mean, 24 miniatures, 30 miniatures, depending on what you're buying. Um, but yeah, if you want uh, realistic armor, Perry Miniatures, they do 100 Years War and War of the Roses. Um, they also have some of the Italian Wars stuff, so you can get a number of different Renaissance periods. They also do colonial period, so you've got you know uh, Sudanese and Africans and British if you're wanting. Not that's not armor, I know, but they also do in metal. They do a pretty good range of samurai and even Korean, medieval Korean, which is really cool. Take care, Grumpy Old Slan. Enjoy your game. There, yeah, there's that. But the biggest problem I have is that Kickstarter has now turned into a pre-order system for larger companies. Um, they there are so many projects on there where they're coming to you with with a completely finished game. All the components are set, all the art is there, the book is done. They just want you to pay for the production up front, and it's a pre-order. Um, there are also horror stories. I mentioned Mekton earlier, and um, my biggest um, Kickstarter horror story was Mekton. He had Mike Pondsmith, the guy from the head of Artel Saurian, had decided he was going to revisit Mekton, one of his earliest games, and make it a big, bright and shiny return to the game in the original fictional universe that he had set it on the planet Algol. And so he had done this Kickstarter, and it was great. And 5 years later, we hadn't seen the book. We hadn't even seen a finished PDF. He was constantly talking about adding new stuff to it. And at the same time, we were seeing a steady stream of releases for his work on Cyberpunk Red, and Cyberpunk 2077 and The Witcher and all this other stuff that he was working on. And I felt really bad that I felt really like I had given him money to develop other projects and he wasn't developing mine. Now, I got a full refund on it after 5 years. because he kept trying, and I can get that. I'm like my very first Kickstarter, the Space Raptors I was working on, I sweat bullets over that one. I was having some problems because it was like I said, I went seriously into pocket, out of pocket for it, and I um, but I'm not an established game designer either. Um, I'm me, and at the time it was me in my garage. You know, Miniatures are not cheap to develop. My last physically sculpted, most of the miniatures I do, I contract others for. My productivity in miniature sculpting isn't high enough to really push ranges of my own, out of my own hands. So I hire sculptors, and my last one was just for the sculpts was $2,400, and that's before we get into molding and manufacturing. Now, fortunately, I have partners over in Scotland through Alternative Armies, and we have a deal, um, where I pay them upfront. Basically, we have a partnership. I see a percentage of the final take, and so I don't have to ever worry about paying for molding. Well, I am paying for molding, but I don't have to come up with the individual costs. So basically, I send them my designs, they mold and produce them. They even they do all the sales front work. It's up on their website. I got my little sub label on there, but I don't have to worry about the coming up with the costs for that. Let's see. So Slan is gone. Zombicide, at least as far as I understand, keeps delivering stuff, and it's fun stuff. But you're right. There are just too many companies out there who are. I like the time when I first started with Kickstarter, where you could come with an idea and some napkin notes and find buyers. Um, and I think that's where it really shined. I don't feel like, and interestingly enough, I mean, on a tangent, it is a popular enough concept now to where some companies have just sidestepped Kickstarter. Was it North Star Minis? Is it North Star? God, I can't remember off the top of my head. The guy who runs the company, his name is Nick, and he runs Nick Starters. He runs his own little Kickstarter because he's got an established label, for his miniatures, and he says, "Here's my idea. Once we get X amount of backers, I'll produce this." Who's it? The guys who do the Albedo miniatures from the old comic, but so many companies. They have a cool one where they're just like, "Okay, we're gonna put this up. Once we get X number of pre-orders, we'll make it." And I think that's cool. I mean, that's you know, if you have if you have an established presence in the industry, then why not? Yeah, except for the thing is that swag has become an expectation instead of something just nifty. So if you peel back before Kickstarter and before the internet, when a company wanted our money, they put out a game and they took the risk. They developed it, they produced it, they put it out there. And then if it was good, we bought it, and then they made more stuff, which we bought, which helped fuel more releases. What a lot of Kickstarters run into is to entice people to buy into them in the first place, they put out a whole bunch of spiffy, swag at a low cost, which they kind of take a bath on. And what they end up, a lot of the problems that companies run into with Kickstarters, and this is one of the things I ran into with mine as well, is the Kickstarter satisfies the itch completely, but it often only pays for itself and does not leave a lot of room for growth for future product, because Kickstarter margins have to be kept really low for people to buy into them. Very few things are going to do like what Reaper did with millions and millions of dollars, um, for their bones. And so yeah, I feel like it gets stuff out there, but it also then creates this the greater FOMO, and I hate FOMO. Fear of missing out is evil. Because there are things like board games, for example, that are Kickstarted that if you didn't get it in the Kickstarter, you never get it until they decide to do another print run, and then they'll run another Kickstarter instead of having a production run that produces a quantity of games, and then you slow down your production. Um, it's basically advanced print on demand, and print and play. Let's see. That does happen. Um, I also feel that this is just the nature of Kickstarter, because Kickstarter does not produce usually healthy profit margins that allow for natural growth in a company. This is true. It will strike, but I've become pretty immune to it because I'm just a crotchety, grumpy old man who just doesn't cotton to that kind of BS anymore. Um, there is there, so it's a great game, and let me preface this before I say what I'm going to say. There's a game called Bot War. It is a love letter to 1980s cartoons. It is Transformers, G.I. Joe, Mask, uh, uh, and several other things all rolled into one. Um, you know, very much its own style, but clearly recognizable. It's got a good game system. The pieces are awesome. The model designs are great. The company is producing stuff at a breakneck speed, and that's where they lose me. I can't keep up with that game. And every time I look, there's been some restructuring of their offerings, or they've got new things that have replaced old things, and I eventually just had to take a step back. And if I'm going to play it, I'm just going to have to play it with what I can get a hold of. Um, but yeah, that's definitely one I think that's plucking that FOMO string real hard, and as kind of caused me to back off from my wife when I picked up a starter set. Um, and uh, just to give it a try. Haven't had a chance to play it because we got it like before, and then the whole move crisis happened. Now that we settled down, maybe we'll get a chance to play it. Let's see. Let's see. Yes, Adric, FOMO is a quarter of your game room shelves. That is true. Adric is from my gaming crowd back in Washington, and he is basically half the board game collection that was there, that we figured we don't have enough life left in us to play all of them. And now I'm 1,000 miles away. So with the OSE, the reason that FOMO would have did tempt me, but I still managed to resist it, was the difficulty in getting the physical product for that game is higher than I want it to be. This is another problem I have with a lot of Kickstarter things. Is that's great. I may not have the money when the Kickstarter hits, but I will have the money. But the product is seldom available when I have the money, so I just miss out. Um, yeah. So, Mike, for this, I would say release your game, grow your community, support your game, let it grow organically to the point where there's a demand for a, a second edition. We talked about this before, like, and then that would be a good time to do a print run, do a Kickstarter for um, a print version. when you have your because we've talked about that you're doing your current one very bare bones, shoestring. Down the road you might be in a position to really go all out on Barrett Wood, and that is when you do that book, um, because you'll know by then if it's worth doing a full book release or not. You would take back some of the OSE adventures. I'm not sure what you mean on that one. I have not seen a lot of them. No, I mean, none of that stuff holds up. However, if you're talking about a miniatures game, which is very much visual, you don't need to have the show hold up. You just need to have the concept of, a Camaro, a gull-wing Camaro that can fly, be present in your mind and have fun little giggles of nostalgia. And that's what this game is all about. Bot War has Transformers, it has Decepticons, it has, even has an Atlantean civilization. It's got hints at an underworld civilization. It's got mad scientists, Soviets, and a G.I. Joe analog that has a special operations branch that is basically Mask. It's got different factions of the bad guys. It's got dinosaur transformers. It's got junk bot transformers. It's got combiners. It's a great universe. And if you grew up in the 80s, it is everything you love. So it's definitely worth checking out. It is out of Australia and it's out of a guy's garage too. So when you see the quality of the resin casts and the miniatures that he uses, it's amazing. And I do give him props for coming up with a way to cast his entire range where miniatures of a particular faction are all cast in a specific color. So even if you're not the sort of person who wants to paint miniatures, you can play it because they have delineation by color like a board game piece. No. The neat thing is because Ant at Traders Galaxy, which is the company that does Bot War, is sort of using a GW style release. Bot War has now spawned a skirmish game with 28mm versions of his G.I. Joe and Cobra analogs with a couple of little of the smaller Transformer characters in there. He's also got an aerial combat game that has like combat between sort of the Atlantean jet fighters versus the GI Joe F-16, F-16 and Tomcats and stuff like that versus the transforming Decepticons and all of that. So he's got this universe with multiple games coming across, which is cool. See you later, Mike. Have a good one. All right, and so we are at that 2-hour mark. At this time, I will need to be saying my goodbyes. Everybody, I'm going to pimp a few other streams. We got Geek Stream on Wednesdays at Ye Olde Geek, where I appear regularly. We talk about this, that, and the other. It's a good one. I was on Shadow and Sun last night. He's a great guy, very much trying to promote the spirit of gaming. I've already talked about Mike and Barrett Wood. I will talk that game up. I've done a little bit of the play testing on it. I've done some proofreading and editing on it for him, but it is a labor of love, and absolutely check it out. Mage's Musings has an amazing channel where he does great adventure recaps for his campaigns that he runs and occasionally talks about game theory. He's come up with a wonderful formula he calls the review cap, which is a recap of his game sessions, and then a review of the module or the portion of the module that he has been playing for, which I think is a perfect blend. And watching reviews can often be a little dry, and the best reviews are often ones that kind of add some entertainment. Anybody who's watched Seth Skorkowski knows, there's a thing. So yeah, it's definitely worth watching. Anybody else in stream have a channel? I don't think I've attracted other streamers all that much. No, that looks like it. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. Real quick, in the future, I will be inviting guests on. I'm just sort of trying to get used to streaming before I start sharing the screen with somebody else. It's not an ego thing. It's just a matter of making sure that this is something that's going to be around long enough and, worth having other people step into. I may in the future, depending on if we can figure out a schedule or not, have my brother start coming on here with me. And there is a possibility that the channel name may change in the future if him and I actually are able to join forces. We've had this idea for a brother's channel, and that would, if we do go with that, the name would change, but it'll be in the same place. Um, and Mechhead Studios. I'm sorry, Jason, I forgot. Jason does have a YouTube channel. He's not a prolific producer of content, but he does produce some cool content. If you like model building, props, miniatures, painting, just general hobby talk, he's a good place to go. And he is just another guy in his garage like me most of the time. So it's very much actually, and not to tip my hat too much on this one, Mages, but we're actually thinking about calling it the Brothers GM as a spin on the Brothers Grimm, but we're both gamers and lifelong gamers. So the Brothers GM would be our channel name. But that is going to be it. We are at 12 o'clock. Have a good one, guys. If you haven't hit like, go ahead and do that. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Share your like of this channel with other people. I am on the Facebooks, and I am on, I've got a Discord. The links will be in the show notes when we're done. And if you want them before then, you can go back to previous videos and they're there as well. Have a good one. Later.